morning! No, we need to wake up. Who needs more coffee? Me too. I haven't had a cup yet. Well, here we go. We need to wake you up. My name is Ferdy. I am your activity manager. What's my name? Ferdy. One more time. Ferdy. A little bit louder. Ferdy. Much like it. And I come to you all the way from 3 countries. The Philippines, Japan, and Spain. Ooh. That's why I'm cuckoo. My dad is Filipino, my mom is Japanese, Spanish. Yeah, that makes me Italian. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we're gonna have a very special speaker, and this gentleman knows almost everything when it comes to, example, the Titanic, about the behavior of dogs, so on and so forth. And you will love him if you have any questions about the history of the Titanic or dog behaviors. And there's some science talk as well that you will be enjoying that he's going to present to all of us. Without any further ado, let's keep it up for your Beyond the Podium speaker all the way from Canada. Let's give it up for Gary Kramer!
What a great rendition of our national anthem. Don't give up your day job. Welcome everybody to Beyond the Podium. I do like the title of this series, Beyond the Podium. There's the podium and I'm beyond it. Okay, we're here for the Titanic. Thank you all for coming. Iceberg hits ship, it sinks. End of story. No, there's a lot more to it than that, and we'll cover that as we go. Now, I do like to begin each presentation with something amusing. This is my self-introductory slide, which unfortunately I don't have any time to go through today because I've got so much information to give you. But the one thing I do want to ask you is, who's retired in here? Very good. Who's not retired? Why not? Enough said. Other things there I'll cover later. Don't have time now. Now the other thing I want to do is give you my humorous effort for today. It should be self-explanatory if you're looking at that. If you don't get it, seek professional help. All right, enough of that. This is the beginning, the 31st of March 1909. They start building the Titanic in Belfast at Harland and Wolff. It takes them 26 months. It's in Belfast. Any of you been to Belfast? Some of you have been there. You've been to the Titanic Museum. You've probably seen where it was built because that's still there. And that's the picture over on the left there. That's where the Titanic was actually built. And that's one of the struts on the right that went into the ship. So Harland and Wolff, over 3,000 workers, 26 months as I said, and the way that ship was put together is not the way they put ships together today. It's welding today. In those days it was rivets, and rivets are a very important part of this story. So I want you to remember rivets. We'll come back to them several times. They used 2 types of rivets. They used iron and steel, and I'll talk more about the iron and steel rivets as we go into this. Some pictures there. This is the anchor chain made somewhere else. Just look at the size of the links. This was the biggest ship at the time. There it is, leaving Southampton in 1912, and at the time the most modern ship of its period. I mean, it was an absolute wonder for those people at the time. This is a map of Southampton towards the waterfront, which is at the bottom of the screen. Each one of those red dots is where a crew member lived in Southampton. 3/4 of the crew came from Southampton. And the yellow arrow that's at the bottom shows you where there's a hotel today, which is where one of the crew members lived, which I stayed in one time when I was in Southampton. But as you can see, lots of crew members came from Southampton, and they did not go home again, unfortunately. How big is it? I've shown you in this representation. You can see a little dot in the middle. There's a person. There's an Airbus. The Titanic's in blue. Behind it's the Queen Mary 2. And I've given you some facts and figures in the table underneath. So we're comparing this ship to the Titanic. And you can see this ship's bigger.
Yes.
Yes, this ship's bigger.
Absolutely.
And when I show you the data for this one, the Symphony of the Seas, which is over on the left, so there's a quote from a passenger that got onto the ship years ago. My word, it's a great big ship. Oh yes, it was then, but compared to the Symphony of the Seas, which is almost 5 times bigger in gross tonnage, not really.
Wow.
Couple of interesting prophecies here. There were 2 books written in 1886 and 1892 by William Stead. He published 2 books prophesizing a sinking, and in each one of those books there were different aspects of the sinking that actually occurred on the Titanic. Now the irony here is William Stead was terrified of drowning, and he's on the Titanic, and he did not survive. In fact, he was last seen up on deck giving away his life jacket to a woman, so he did not survive, prophesied his own death in a way. But this one here in 1898, which is the wreck of the Titan. Notice the name Titan. We'll come back to Titan a bit later, but it's also very close to Titanic. And it prophesied a ship sinking basically the same way the Titanic did. And you'll see all there, the bullet points, they hit all of the same points that happened to the Titanic, including almost the same location as where the Titanic went down. A coincidence? Well, obviously, unless he's a time traveler, knew about it, came back, wrote a story and wanted to cash in on it. So maybe that's proof of time travel. This is the route. It starts in Southampton, it goes to Cherbourg, it goes to Queenstown on the 11th of April 1912. They have a couple of days at sea, some luxury, and then of course the disaster hits. And we'll go through the disaster as we go along. There's some statistics there about the number of people that got on, and also the lucky people that got off. But some people got off. One of them who got off is Father Brown, whose pictures I'm showing you in a lot of the slides that we see here. They're Father Brown's pictures. These are some of the lucky ones. They disembarked at Queenstown, now Cove. Anybody been to Cove? You've probably seen where people disembarked and embarked on the Titanic. We'll cover that in just a second. And there it is, leaving Queenstown. This is the last picture of the Titanic that we know about. And again, Father Brown is responsible for this. So now let's have a quick tour of the Titanic and have a look around it. So these are the prices, a little bit small, so for those of you in the back, I'll just cover the first class. They range from £870 to over 4,000, sorry, that's dollars. No, 870 pounds is $4,000 in 1912. You inflate that to 2019, it's about $130,000 for first class. So it was still a lot of money, even in those days. Now the third class was much, much cheaper. As you can see, tickets varied anywhere from £3 to £8. Dogs and children were half price. This is where some of you have seen the boarding of the Titanic. I hope you don't think the Titanic came up to the side and was docked there. That wasn't the case. The Titanic remained out in the estuary, and it was tenders that took the passengers to and from the Titanic. We're all familiar with tenders, or they were no exception. And these are the 123 unlucky people that boarded the Titanic. They were taken to the ship, as I said, on a tender. This is a picture of them getting off the tender, going on to the Titanic at Cove. This was a first. The crew loaded the luggage for the passengers on the ship. Now you think crew loading luggage, and you see how they load luggage today. It was a bit different in those days. They didn't have the forklifts that they've got. Luggage was different, as you see in some of these pictures, and also very different. These are travelling wardrobes, obviously, for the first class. So luggage was really quite considerable. RMS Titanic, Royal Mail ship. Definitely not the first, but one of many of the ships that was taking mail across the Atlantic. So if you ever wonder what RMS meant for, Royal Mail Ship, and these are some of the mail bags going onto the Titanic, and obviously those letters didn't get there. Here's the grand staircase. That's only for the first class passengers. And of course that is a picture that was taken out of the film, but that's a recreation of what it looked like. Over on the left we've got the top of the grand staircase. At the bottom left we've got the stairs leading to the third class, so staircase for the third class. Over on the right we've got a picture of the third class staircase. It's carpeted. Third class staircase is carpeted. That's luxury for them. They're really in heaven, and when we get to their dining room and their menu, you'll see what I mean. Although it wasn't very pleasant down there. This is a first class cabin. This is Father Brown's cabin. It's A37. This and A36, for some reason, didn't have any signage outside of it, so he had trouble finding his cabin, believe it or not. When he found it, he took a picture of it, and he was one of the lucky ones that got off at Cove. So we have his wonderful photographs, many of which you'll see today, and his pictures are indeed wonderful. This is a colorized one of the suites. This is a parlor suite, and when I'm showing you these pictures, there's some information about the people that stayed there. I'm not necessarily going to read that. That's your job. Have a look. But most of them, of course, fatalities are associated with the people staying in these rooms. This is another parlor suite. This first class again. Now, interestingly, in every cabin, first, second, and third class, there's running water. Now, this doesn't sound like a big deal to you today, but for third class passengers, they're in a palace, running water in their cabin. Not toilets, but running water. This is the promenade deck outside of B-52. That's Bruce Ismay's suite. He had a private promenade. Of course, he's the chairman and the managing director of White Star. And there are myths about him, like how he tried to dress as a woman to get off the ship. That's not true. Any of these myths you hear about Ismay is not true. There may be a little bit of truth in the fact that he wanted the blue ribbon, so the ship was perhaps going too fast through the ice field. Yes, that is a problem. This is the reading and writing room, originally designed for women to relax in. This is the first class lounge, very nice, very spacious. This is the first class gym. The gym master is rowing, and in the back, sitting on the bicycle, is William Parr, an electrician who was traveling first class. Unfortunately, both of those men did not survive. Men and women did not share the gym at the same time, so the lady in the left has her own hours to go to the gym for first class, and she's riding a bicycle in a ball gown. This is the band, and we know about the band. The band was a contract band. They actually didn't work for White Star, so it's a miracle they stayed on deck and played to the bitter end. Deck games, we have a child there spinning a top. We actually know who he was, with his father. His name's Frederick, the father's name is Frederick, and some of the children didn't survive. Many of the children didn't survive in third class. This is a second class cabin. You can see the sink in the back there, so they got their running water. Bunk beds, not quite so luxurious as first class, of course. This is the second class lounge. Hard to see with the light here, unfortunately. This is the third class dining, so they've got tables where they're all sitting next to each other. And while the food is basic there, you see the menu over on the left, there was lots of food. For the third class passengers, they're in paradise. There's food every day for every meal. They don't have to worry about it. These are very poor people, but necessarily didn't eat every day. So this is luxury for them. This is the third class cabin. Now these varied from 2 up to 10 berths. So you would have 10 people in a cabin. Bunk beds, of course, but nonetheless, they had the running water. You see the tub in the middle. 262 cabins in all. But for all of those third class passengers, there were only 2 baths. One for the men and one for the women. So they didn't necessarily wash every day. Some animals were on the ship. We actually know who they were, and it's listed here. Some of them survived. A Pekingese and 2 Pomeranians survived. They got smuggled onto the lifeboats. The very sad story is, of course, Anne Isham, who owned the Great Dane. The Great Dane is actually shown there. She refused to leave without her dog, got out of the lifeboat and went back to her dog, and was later found floating in the water dead with her dog in her arms. And I do say that's tragic, but the dogs that were on board were let out, though of course most of them died, as did many of the passengers. This is the hero dog Rigel. The story behind Rigel is because he was a Newfoundlander, he was able to survive the waters, the frigid waters. It really was very cold, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And it was his barking that alerted the Carpathian to the fact that they'd missed a lifeboat, and his barking attracted the Carpathian to the lifeboat, and those people were saved. And of course, it's in the newspaper, so it must be true. That's total fabrication. That dog was not on board. There we go. There were 2 hairdressers. This is the first class barber. There was one for the second class, but if you were third class, well, you just had to let it grow. There were no facilities for you on board. This is the Café Parisien, a first of its kind on a liner. Over on the right, the windows there look out over the Atlantic Ocean, much in the same way we're looking out into the water here in the Sky Lounge. And they had some really nice things on the menu, oysters, for example, a luxurious place. No, the third class passengers didn't go there. That's for the first class. This is tea time. We have some first class passengers having tea here, very refined, very lovely, but again, only first class. Yes, there was shopping on board, of course. This is an enterprising woman in Cove who brought her lace on board, so she was able to get off again. And of course, getting off is very important on this ship. This is the promenade. It could be Captain Smith there that's walking away from us. There were 2 promenade decks that looked like this, one on top of the other. And then there was another one that had windows as well. And this is another view of the promenade. A very nice area to go walking around, very wide. There is a swimming pool, first class only, heated salt water, and let me let you into a secret. It's still full. This is the Turkish bath. I wish somebody would colorize this photograph, but I've only got the black and white. Again, first class only. If you could afford it, it was really luxurious. And of course, we've got the top promenade deck where the lifeboats were. And because the planned number of lifeboats obscured the view of the passengers walking around, they got rid of a whole bunch of them. And in fact, they only put 20 of the planned 48 lifeboats up there. So they only had capacity at maximum for half the number of people on the ship, crew included. Stupidity, right? Well, we know that, of course, because hindsight's 2020. These are the boilers. This is not the Titanic's boilers, but it would have looked like this. And I do want to highlight this because these men that were working 24 hours a day, stoking these voracious furnaces to fuel the ship, worked as the water flooded their compartments to keep the electricity and the power on for as long as possible. They all died. The largest propeller ever to have been on a ship is shown here. It's one of the Titanic's propellers. You can see the people there, and there's the propeller. There were 3 of them. No propeller on a ship has ever reached that size. So it does hold a record in that respect. Communications is not what you think it is today. This is one of the communication stations. They didn't have telephones in the way you understand it. This is a voice system where you blow through a tube and make sounds. This is the Marconi room. This is the radio room, if you like. And there were 2 radio operators. Of course, Morse code is the only way they could communicate then. And the Marconi rooms on each ship were run by the Marconi company. They did not work for the White Star Line. And that's a problem, as you'll see when we get to the California. Those 2 operators stayed on duty for as long as they could. So let's talk about the collision now. This is the location of the Titanic here That's the limit just above it of the ice field. This is the limit of the icebergs in April. So we've got ice field north, icebergs south, and they're sailing through it. And you'll see the location of some of the other ships there. The Carpathian, the Californian are all listed there. This is what it would have looked like from the deck going through the Atlantic Ocean at that point. Actually looks lovely, excepting it's ice. This gives you an idea of the size of the icebergs. There's a destroyer behind this iceberg. That's how big the icebergs were in that part of the Atlantic Ocean. And that's what they had to avoid. This is what Frederick Fleet could see from the lookout just before the collision. Do you see the iceberg? No, neither did he until it was too late. And one of the reasons he didn't see it is because the binoculars that they used to look for things had been locked up. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is the timeline, 11:30. The Titanic is sailing at pretty much full speed, 20.5 knots. 10 minutes later, Frederick Fleet reports there's an iceberg right ahead, and it's literally seconds ahead. Very little time indeed. 12 o'clock, the captain is advised that the Titanic will sink. That's when they start issuing the distress signals from the Marconi room. They didn't think it was going to sink. 12:25, the lifeboats are ordered down. 12:45, the first lifeboat leaves with only 28 people on board. There's 37 empty seats on that. 1:15, the ship tilts and starts to go down. 1:30, passengers panic, and they are jumping off the ship, they're jumping into lifeboats, they're jumping into the water. 2:18 a.m., the Titanic breaks up into two sections, and then by 2:20, the stern section that was still floating around a little bit goes down, and everybody that is on that section goes into the water. The Marconi room, the two men that worked there, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, showed over on the right. They had received ice warnings, which they did pass up to the bridge on the 14th of April. They received 6 more ice warnings by 11 o'clock. Part of the problem with this Marconi room is they were there to service the passengers. They were sending messages. They were receiving telegrams. They weren't concerned about environmental conditions. And in fact, when the Californian was trying to tell them that there were some icebergs in the area, Phillips told them to shut up because he was busy doing exactly what I just said. So he never did accept the severe warning the Californian was trying to give him. They did order the distress signal, as I said. The CQD was the distress signal in those days. The SOS that you're all familiar with was just coming into use, and it was part of the signal that was sent out. They stayed there until the water came up to their ankles, and one of them survived, one of them did not. You see here, the Bride did survive. He's being taken off with frostbite in both of his ankles because they stayed so long in the frigid water. This is what was sent out. This is radio communications of the time. It's Morse code. And it's decoded for you over on the right. CQD, this is Titanic. CQD, struck iceberg. CQD, require assistance. SOS, CQD, SOS, and it carries on a bit longer. How big was that iceberg? Well, we know ice went into the deck. We know that from people that told us about it. So you know how high that iceberg had to be. It had to reach up so that ice, when the ship hit the iceberg, would have to go over onto the deck. So it had to be quite tall. It's estimated that it was anywhere from 24 to 30 meters high and about 120 meters wide and 60 meters tall above the water. And of course, 90% of the iceberg, as you know, is below the water, and we don't know what shape that was down there. It could have been protruding out quite a bit. These are pictures of some icebergs that were taken later by different captains. Each one of those has paint down the bottom, so it's possible one of those icebergs is the one that was responsible for sinking the Titanic. But the most likely culprit is shown here because from passenger descriptions of the iceberg, they were able to sort of reconstruct it in drawings and then compare those drawings to the photographs that they had, and this looks like the most the most fitting iceberg. It would have come from Greenland, by the way. This is the ship that didn't. This is the Californian. The Californian was really quite close to the Titanic, and when the Titanic was in trouble, one of the things it did, in addition to sending out the radio message you just heard, was send up emergency rockets. The Californians saw some of those rockets. They didn't see them all. Some went off port side, some went off starboard side. They saw only one side. They thought the Titanic was having a party. They did try and communicate to the Titanic using a lamp, but they didn't get any response. Maybe it just wasn't seen. They thought when the light subsided that the Titanic had sailed away. Well, it did, but it went down. And so the Californian left. It was only a bit later that it got messages and it went back to the area. It got back to the area at 6 a.m. The captain of the Californian was severely reprimanded and his career was finished. Were the third class trapped? For those of you who saw the film, you saw that they were trapped. There is no historical evidence that they were trapped with gates locked. There's no evidence at all for that. It is true that they were down at the bottom decks, which would have flooded first. It is true that many of them did not speak English. It is true that they did not have time to familiarize themselves with the layout of the ship, so they could have got lost. Yes, they were at a great disadvantage, but they weren't locked downstairs. The lifeboats left with about 400 empty seats. And as you know, only 50% of the people would have fit in the lifeboats anyway. So that's a lot that didn't make it. There's a lot of talk about what was the last song that was played by the musicians before they stopped. Doesn't matter who tells you what. Bottom line is, we don't know. And it doesn't matter what kind of analysis we go into, forensic or otherwise, we don't know. We've got conflicting evidence from people that were on board the ship and it doesn't agree. There's some suggestions of what it could be, but bottom line, we don't know. They all lost their lives. This is Wallace Hartley's violin. He did not survive. He might be buried in Halifax, we don't know, because there's a number of unknown graves there. A couple of the musicians are buried in Halifax. But his violin was found floating around, and in 2013, it sold for about $1.7 million in auction. The film, for those of you who've seen it, yes, it gives you a taste of what the ship was like. Yes, there's a J. Dawson in the cemetery. It's not Jack Dawson, it's somebody else. It was completely coincidental that there's a J. Dawson in the cemetery in Halifax. And of course, the sinking scenes are highly exaggerated, and we'll talk about what really happened in just a moment. We now know that the ship broke in half, and it broke in half at a shallow angle, no more than 25 degrees off the horizontal. And that's when the ship split. Why did it sink? It's unsinkable, right? You all know that. Why did it sink? Well, it wasn't unsinkable because it did sink. Remember I said rivets? Well, here we are. The ship is held together with rivets. In the middle, we've got the steel rivets. They're the stronger rivets. In the aft and the bow, we've got the iron rivets, which are the weaker rivets. I don't know why they did it that way, but they did. They used 3 million of them. Some of the rivets have been recovered from the wreck and they have been tested, and indeed some of them were only 27% as strong as the material they were holding together. In other words, they were weaker than the plates they were holding together. This is an analysis of one of the rivets. Where you see red, there is slag in that rivet. The more slag there is in the rivet, the weaker it is and the easier it is to break the rivet if you apply a force. Which is what the iceberg did. It applied a force. So this is what happened. The iceberg underwater impacted the side of the hull. The rivets popped and we open up a seam. And as the ship grazes the iceberg, more rivets pop. And there are several seams that get opened up inside the Titanic. This is a deck plan of the Titanic. and sonar has shown 6 thin openings where the rivets popped and allowed water to go in. You can't see them very well on this, but the arrows show you where they are. This ship would not have sunk if the first 4 compartments had been filled with water. But unfortunately, the rivets popped all the way down into section 6. So too much water got in down the ship tank. This is a revision by James Cameron of what we believe happened. The ship there tried to avoid hitting the propeller. That was the impact with it. The total time of this video is 2 hours and 40 minutes, so it's speeded up. So the water is already going into the front of the ship right now, and the bow's coming down, and as the front of the bow gets submerged, the ship will list about 10 degrees, which is shown there. It starts to sink further. The water then gets into the boilers, and that's when it all goes dark. The back end of the ship is going to rise. This is the front funnel breaking off and going down. It was found separately on the sea floor. The ship pivots as the front end gets heavier and heavier, and as it gets to about 25 degrees, it breaks in half. That's the low angle. The front of the ship goes down first, and the back end of the ship stays afloat a little bit longer, but then it too fills with water and goes, and the ship plummets all the way down to the sea floor, which is about 12,500 feet at the point where that collision took place. I won't read most of these quotes. I'll just read the bottom quote to you. The sounds of people drowning are something that I cannot describe to you, and neither can anyone else. It is the most dreadful sound, and there is a terrible silence that follows it. So this is from one of the survivors in the lifeboats, and you see some pictures of the lifeboats there. This is the lost and found. This is the statistics of everybody that we know was on board. The final figures were actually on the Titanic itself, the complete list of who was on board. So that's been lost. This is the best that we can do. Look at just a few things. On board, we think just over 2,000 people. 68% of them lost. This last column is those lost. 17% of the children in first class lost, none in second class. 66% of the children in third class lost. They died. 78% of the crew lost, of the males. 92% of the men in second class lost. 84% of the men in third class lost. Women did much better, except in third class where 54% of them were lost. So those are the figures as best we know it. This is the news, and of course we can all trust the news. The Daily Mail shown there on April the 16th. I'll just read that one. Titanic sunk, no lives lost. Let's trust the newspapers. These are some of the survivors. This is boat D that was picked up by the Carpathia at 7:15 the following day. These are the life jackets. We don't know how many of them were used. They were cork in canvas. And there was a problem with these life jackets because if you didn't go into the water properly, the back end of the life jacket would come up and break your neck. So if you jumped in, the life jacket could kill you as well. Only 9 remain today, and one of them was sold for £60,000 some years ago. It's shown there over on the right. These are some of the lucky survivors on the Carpathia. These are some of the unrecovered over on the left. We have a body that's being treated by the embalmer. Over on the right, we have a body being hauled into a lifeboat. And you see the figures there, almost 1,200 people. Some of you went to the Halifax Cemetery, 121 graves there. I was there yesterday. It's always been an ambition of mine to go there, and we did. And we all know that there are other people buried in 2 other cemeteries in Halifax, and then elsewhere too. And then there were a number of bodies that were buried at sea, 166 buried at sea. And you see the service there over on the right where they were buried at sea. This is the only thing that survived from the Titanic, the lifeboats. This picture shows you the lifeboats in New York at Pier 59. Whatever happened to those lifeboats, we don't know. They've disappeared from history. Some of them were left in the Atlantic, and of course they've gone. The only thing that I do know about is one number that was saved from a lifeboat. And that was told to me by a passenger, and I was able to track it down. The picture on the left, although you can't see it very clearly, there is a Pomeranian on board, and I've actually shown you here. It's very hard to see, but there's a Pomeranian there in the woman's coat. Dogs were on lifeboats 3, 6, and 7. This is the number of lifeboat 6 that somebody collected, and there is a little note underneath full of misinformation. So they got the name of the ship that rescued people wrong, and of course they cast aspersion on Ismay's cause of the wreck. So can't believe even what you find in collections. This is the last lifeboat. It was found a month later. It's shown up here. It's up there when they found it. And they found 3 bodies in there, 2 firemen and Thomas Beatty, and he's number 37. And there was a wedding band in there with an inscription on it. So that was the last thing that was found from them. This is Captain Smith over on the left. He's there with his dog, who was not on board, so the dog survived. We believe his last words were, "Well, boys, do your best for the women and children and look out for yourselves." We don't know what happened to him. We don't know. It's fanciful to say he went down with the ship on the bridge, but literally, we don't know what happened to Captain Smith. Then there's the inquiries. Oh yes, the inquiries. It was unsinkable. And it got that because it was described in trade magazines. These uprights that you see in the plan there are the watertight compartments. And notice they don't go all the way to the top. So if you get enough water going in there, they'll go over into the next compartment. So there's a concertina effect. So the unsinkable got branded around, unfortunately. As long as 4 of them flooded, it's okay. It could have stayed afloat, but it didn't. 6 of them got flooded, in fact. And it was based as being unsinkable through the newspapers and trade magazines at the time, and the practically unsinkable became unsinkable. And so this is how it came into popular thinking as being the unsinkable ship, and it wasn't. So the binoculars. Officer David Blair left on the 9th of April, and unfortunately he took with him the key to the cabinet where the binoculars were contained that the lookouts used to look out for things like icebergs. And that key was later sold at auction for $180,000. The comments there are from the inquiry when they were questioning Frederick Fleet, and I'll paraphrase. Fleet said if he had the binoculars, there would have been enough time to avoid the iceberg. He would have seen it. We don't know, of course. That's what he said. The only way to find out is to do it again with binoculars and see if you can avoid it. You can't do that. These are the inquiries. There were 2. There was one in Britain, there was one in the US. I've given you the statistics there. I won't read through those. But as you can see, they seem to be very thorough. There's lots of information in there. There's lots of witnesses that testified, and they really tried to get to the bottom of it. There were some funny questions asked at the inquiry, as noted in this newspaper article, which you can't read, but these are some of the funny questions. I won't go through all of them. I'll just pick 1 or 2 and read them to you. Of what are icebergs composed? No ice. Could the passengers take refuge in the watertight compartments? And is 48 degrees Fahrenheit above 0? There were politicians asking these questions, so what can I say? These are the findings. The USA and the UK report basically said the same thing. I'll just read one of them. The UK said the ship did not break in 2, and she did eventually attain the perpendicular, which is what you saw in the film.
Yes.
Wrong. Cover up. Yes? Well, look at this information. From the testimonies, in the US, 8 people saw the ship break. 3 said it was intact, and 36 didn't know. In the UK, 5 saw the ship break, 3 said it was intact, 40 didn't know. If we combine the two, and some people testified in both, so that's why the numbers don't quite make sense. 13 saw the ship break, 4 said it was intact, and 65 didn't know. So, what do you think? Did it break? Did it attain the perpendicular if it broke? No. Why did they cover up? National pride is one reason. They built this great ship. How could it possibly sink? Well, it did sink. Well, how could it possibly break up? Because it was so well made. Unfortunately, it does seem to be a cover-up. The wreck, look where the wreck is right just off the continental shelf, a little bit further, and it would have been sitting on the continental shelf, but it went all the way down to the bottom, unfortunately. It was found in 1985 by Robert Ballard. He led that expedition. Prior to that, people thought the ship was intact so they could bring it up, and there were some really wacky ideas to do that. I like the one at the bottom: encase the wreck in ice and let it float. How? Okay. This is what the bow looks like when Ballard went down. 1985. This is what the bow looks like today. You can see it's all crushed and mangled. This is a composite of some high-def photographs. These are the engines encrusted in rusticules. These are the propellers, also encrusted in rusticules. This is the stern, encrusted, of course. The wreckage, you can see the 2 parts of the ship are separated by 600 meters, there and there. There are remains on the sea floor. We see there in the pictures on the top one some boots. There would have been a body in that. All gone, all been taken by the sea. The sea's taking pretty much everything, actually. The site's been pillaged. It's been down, people have been down there, they've taken things away. Cameron's been there 33 times. 140 people have been to that site, and some of them have removed things, and in doing so, have actually caused the wreck to degrade further. So when they recovered a bell, for example, the crow's nets fell down on the front and destroyed more of the front of the ship. This is Captain Smith's bath here. And when they went back down in 2019 to look again at what was there, that was all gone, because the ship is dissolving into the sea. Microbes are eating away at the wreck, and it is estimated at the current rate of deterioration, it will probably be gone in 7 to 10 years. A couple got married there. They went down to the bow in 2001. A couple got married there. It cost them $26,000. Interestingly, the person that officiated from the surface, clever man from the surface, was Captain Ron Warwick. He was captain of the QE2. We met him on Queen Mary when he was Commodore in Cunard. This was another visit. As I said, in 2019, they went down there and they found many parts of the ship had simply vanished. It just wasn't there anymore. And then, of course, there's Ocean Gate. They did more than 200 dives after 2009. Yes, I'm talking about the Titanic. We'll get to that in a second. There's memorials everywhere, but these are 2 from Southampton. Over on the left is the memorials for the engineers, the ones that kept stoking those boilers for as long as possible. They all died when the ship went down. Over on the right, there is a memorial for the musicians who played to the bitter end on the ship. They're both in Southampton. Then there's the 5 more, of course. This is the Titan, imploded on the 18th of June as it went down. It was actually heard, the implosion was actually heard by the US Navy, and the wreckage, of course, was found some days later. And this is what happened, as best we know. So there's the Titanic on the surface. The Titan descends. That's 200 meters. It goes further down, 2,100, 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters. And at some point here, they run into some problems because we know they had released the ballast. They were trying to come back up to the surface. You know, the ballast was released from that. This is what it would have looked like down there. We didn't have lights on. I personally wouldn't like to be sitting in a cylinder going down there, because that's what you did. You sat on the floor in the cylinder. And then 20 milliseconds, it implodes. That's faster than the nerves carry signals to the brain. You wouldn't have felt it. The implosion would have heated the air up to quite a substantial explosion. The bright flash there is the explosion. You literally, you or they would have been vaporized, and into the sea they go. No trace will be found of the human remains from the Titanic, unfortunately. Let me conclude with this interesting little tidbit. This is Violet Jessup. She was a ship nurse. She was on the Olympic, one of the sister ships, from 1911 to 1912. That ship collided with a warship and nearly sank. Then she was on the Titanic in 1912. She got off in lifeboat 16. She was holding the baby. Somebody gave her a baby to hold while she was on the ship, and it was only when she got to shore that the mother was found and the baby was given back to the rightful parents. The family survived. And then on 1916, she's on the Britannic, another sister ship. It struck a mine and it sank, but she survived all three of those.